There's no doubt that the potential of a crash makes motorsport even more exciting, but there's nothing more boring than seeing repeats of the same crashes over and over. So here's 20 forgotten Formula 1 crashes you've probably never seen before. First is this wild moment for racer-turned-commentator Martin Brundle. The 1996 drivers were getting ready for their first Grand Prix of the year at the Albert Park circuit, which was also F1's first time visiting this track. But for Martin Brundle, this excitement was short-lived after this monster crash at Turn 3. He drove into the back of another car, and his Jordan Peugeot got launched dramatically into the air. He flew over a McLaren and flipped upside down immediately. The Jordan slid into the gravel trap on its rollover hoop and dug into the ground in a very nasty crash. The car literally split in two and folded over on top of itself, showing just how fragile these cars really were.
Wow, that's one of the Jordans! This is what we feared at this corner, and that looks very nasty indeed.
Just 3 years later, this horrible smash happened at the 1999 British Grand Prix for none other than Michael Schumacher. The German was a two-time world champion already at this stage. He was racing for Ferrari around Silverstone when he had what was probably the worst crash of his entire F1 career. On the first lap, he was battling with teammate Eddie Irvine down the high-speed hangar straight. At the worst possible moment, when Schumacher was flat out, the rear brakes failed on his Ferrari F399, and he was sent straight into the tyre barrier at high speed. He broke his leg in the crash and had to miss 6 races that year, hurting his chance to fight for the title. But he was lucky to come back at all after this horror shunt.
The German's late on the brakes, locking up across the gravel, and that's a very heavy impact into the tyre barrier.
Another Ferrari driver who had a massive crash in red was Kimi Räikkönen, and it happened to be at the exact same track. The Finn was deep in the action on the opening lap of the 2014 British Grand Prix when he ended up in the wall. He was going through the left-handed Aintree corner when he had a massive snap. The F14T wasn't exactly known for its good handling, and it definitely didn't do Kimi any favors here. He couldn't regain control of the car as it flicked left and right at extremely high speed, and he was thrown straight into the wall under the bridge and suffered a monumental impact. The car was flung across the track and smashed into 2 other cars before hitting the wall on the other side of the tarmac.
And that took him wide. He just got onto the grass. He completely lost control.
Yeah, no, he hit a bump. Hit a bump.
The Canadian Grand Prix is one of those tracks that doesn't look too scary until you really think about it. The cars are flying around this high-speed track with concrete walls just inches away, waiting to claim their next victim. And unfortunately, at the 1997 Canadian Grand Prix, Olivier Panis slipped up big time. The Frenchman took his first and only F1 win at the Monaco Grand Prix a year earlier, but this tight track wasn't just as kind to him. He lost control of his Prost in the fast S's and hit the wall hard, but the second impact was worse. His car was thrown across the track and smashed into the barriers hard at a horrible angle. Panis broke both legs in the crash, a reminder that even the easiest looking corners can bite hard.
The right-hand rear wheel had a problem turning the car into the wall.
To be honest, in F1 it doesn't even have to be a corner, because the same can be said for the straights. At the 1989 French Grand Prix, F1 visited the Paul Ricard circuit. Yes, the same Paul Ricard before it was ruined with blue and red stripes. At the very first corner on the very first lap, Mauricio Gugelmin locked up his tyres and completely lost control of his car. He hit Thierry Boutsen and Nigel Mansell, and his car turned upside down in a violent flip. 2 of the wheels broke off and it slid down the track on its roll hoop, taking Gugelmin on one of the wildest rides of his entire F1 career.
And you can see that Gugelmin has locked up his brakes. He's charging through. He hits the back of Boutsen's Williams, with Patrese already out of the race.
In the days before every moment of pre-season testing was recorded and streamed live, there would often be rumors or reports of drivers having big crashes that barely anyone saw. But in the 1990 pre-season test, this crash of Satoru Nakajima was one of the rare ones caught on camera. They were testing in Jerez, and Nakajima's car broke in one of the worst sections of track. In the high-speed corner, his rear wing suddenly detached, and without giving him any chance of saving it, it spun around immediately. He was sent flying off the track backwards at full speed, doing a 360 through the gravel trap before smashing off the barrier extremely hard. The front suspension was destroyed, and the tire barrier was busted open after this very dangerous accident.
Unfortunately, Nakajima had a nasty shock when a rear wing mounted collapsed.
Speaking of pre-season testing, Kimi Raikkonen had another heavy hit that most people forget about, and this one came in 2005 at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. Kimi crashed his new McLaren extremely hard after spinning in the high-speed right-hander of turn 11. In a violent snap, the car spun around when it hit the barrier and broke the suspension. Raikkonen suffered a badly bruised thumb in the accident and took the next day off with Pedro de la Rosa hopping into the car instead. It's never good to have a crash this big before your season even gets underway.
À deux doigts du désastre.
It's not good having a ridiculously big crash before a race either, but that's exactly what Alex Caffey did in 1991. He was practicing for the Monaco Grand Prix when he suffered this outrageous smash on the famous streets. He went almost headfirst into the wall at a bad angle, and out of nowhere, the car literally folded in on itself like it was made of paper. The wheels, bodywork, and even the complete rear half of the car detached from the survival cell in one of the most terrifying crashes the streets of Monaco have ever seen. This smash just shows how unsafe these cars truly were.
A huge accident on Saturday morning involving Alex Caffey.
It's back to the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve for this next one, when the menacing Montreal track served up this eerie wreck. Pedro Diniz was driving his Sauber Patronus in FP1 when he suddenly lost control coming into turn 1. He spun and hit the entry curb, launching his car straight into the air and across the runoff. It bounced across the gravel before smashing into the tire barrier head-on at high speed. The Brazilian was spun around and thrown back onto the track for good measure, with his car well and truly out of action. Brendan Hartley continues to have a brilliant career in sports car racing, but his stint in F1 didn't live up to expectations. He had a couple of big crashes during his 25-race career, and this was one of them. During free practice 3 for the 2018 British Grand Prix, Hartley suffered this absolutely huge wreck. The front left suspension failed on his Toro Rosso, causing his car to spiral out of control while approaching top speed. It shot across the gravel trap and hit the ground awkwardly, bouncing it up into the air. This caused it to smash into the barrier hard at a nasty angle, and the red flag came out straight away.
Oh, he's gone off! And a big crash there for the Toro Rosso.
Pedro Diniz is back for a second entry on the list, and this time it happened on German soil. F1 was visiting the Nürburgring, and after the cars were sitting on the grid for almost 40 seconds in a delayed start, the lights finally went out. This probably had all the drivers on edge, culminating in a crash just after turn 1. Pedro Diniz tried to go around a group of cars that slowed down coming out of the corner, but when he did, Vogt clipped the back of his car, and that was the beginning of the end. His Sauber Patronus got launched into the air and flipped over onto its roll hoop. Judging by the terrifying state of the car though, it looks like the only thing the roll hoop did was break. When the car got turned the right way up, it was clear that the roll hoop did snap off, but somehow Diniz survived the crash.
Benetton goes across and clips the back of Diniz as he's minding his own business, going around the outside.
Long before the flashy streets of Vegas or the fake marina at the Miami Grand Prix, F1 was racing in the US around the streets of Phoenix, Arizona. But the 1991 race turned into one to forget for Riccardo Patrese and Roberto Moreno. Patrese was running in a solid second place, but unfortunately his gearbox locked up and caused him to spin. What's even worse is that the car stopped at the exit of a corner and he couldn't get it going again. A couple of cars managed to avoid him, but Roberto Moreno in 4th place couldn't do the same. He smashed into the stalled Patrese and broke the suspension and front wing off both cars in a very scary incident for both drivers. Definitely not the best way to start your season.
Roberto Moreno in 4th place, couldn't avoid him.
Riccardo Patrese was in the wars again, this time at the British Grand Prix in 1989. He was coming absolutely flat out towards the high-speed right-hander, and from inside the cockpit, everything seemed to be under control. But from the outside, smoke could be seen shooting out the back of his Williams. It dropped oil onto his rear tires, so when he turned in, the grip obviously wasn't there. It shot his car around immediately, spinning him off the track. When he hit the gravel, it was like he hit a ramp, and his car went airborne straight away. Talk about bad design. It launched him into the tyre barrier extremely violently, completely wrecking his car in the process. That's not how Williams would have liked their home race weekend to go.
He has a hold radiator, the fluid gets onto the rear wheels, and he spins round and into the club tyre barrier.
Alessandro Zanardi, or as he's better known, Alex Zanardi, was well known for his fearless driving style, often pulling off moves that seemed impossible. Unfortunately, he was involved in many large accidents in his career, which are well documented. But the one that you mightn't have seen before was his monster shunt from the weekend of the 1993 Belgian Grand Prix. During practice at Spa-Francorchamps, Zanardi was driving completely on the limit through the treacherous Eau Rouge, attempting to find the limits of his Team Lotus 107. But it became clear pretty quickly that he was actually driving past the car's limit, because out of nowhere he lost control and flew off the track, smashing the outside wall head-on at around 150 miles per hour. The massive impact caused his car to shatter, erupt in flames, and spin violently as it broke into pieces along the racetrack. It then landed in the gravel trap on the other side of the track, and when other drivers tried to avoid the debris, it caused Senna to crash too. Zanardi was sidelined for 9 months after this horrific crash, but luckily recovered and went back to racing.
This was a massive shunt.
It was the biggest shunt I've seen all year. Zanardi, I can't imagine what speed he hit the barrier virtually head-on.
Next on the list is a man who needs no introduction. But before Max Verstappen was the 3-time world champion he is today, he was fighting it out in the midfield in a Toro Rosso. While driving for the team in 2015 as a 17-year-old, he had this huge crash on the streets of Monaco. He was chasing Romain Grosjean in his Lotus, and when he got close to him on the main straight, he attempted the overtake. But a bit of misjudgment ended up very costly for the young Dutchman. He absolutely sent it on Grosjean, but instead of going around him, he got his braking wrong and plowed into the back of his Lotus instead. It sent him headfirst into the barrier at Sainte-Devote at extremely high speed in a seriously scary smash. It's crazy to think you could just walk away from a crash this big, but thankfully he did.
And Verstappen goes straight into the barrier at Sainte-Devote.
Next up is a similar story for Lewis Hamilton, because before he had 7 world titles to his name, he suffered a monumental crash in his debut year too. The Brit was racing for McLaren at the Nürburgring in 2007 and was pushing hard while approaching the S's in qualifying. But at the worst possible moment, his front right tyre failed and he lost control of his car, sending him straight off the track. As his McLaren bounced across the gravel, it went airborne and was launched straight into the barrier at extremely high speed and a horrible angle. It was clear that he was in pain after the smash and was taken away in the ambulance, but luckily suffered no injuries. We're staying in Germany for this next one, albeit it's back to the 90s. The most famous crash of Eric Comas's career was the one at Spa in '92, when Ayrton Senna was credited with saving his life by stopping on the track and turning off Comas's engine. But a year earlier, Comas suffered this huge hit during qualifying for the 1991 German GP. The Frenchman crashed his Ligier Lamborghini extremely hard into the tire barrier, throwing tires all across the track. His Ligier flipped over, caught fire, and ripped the whole right side off the car in the process. The session was stopped and the ambulance arrived on the scene after this very nasty shunt.
Just a little on the left, and then I spun and I crashed, but I don't know exactly why.
The 2012 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix saw Kimi Räikkönen's first win of the year and also his first with his new team Lotus. But elsewhere in the race, chaos was breaking out between two other drivers. Nico Rosberg was involved in a very scary moment at Yas Marina as he collided with Narain Karthikeyan. The German was chasing Karthikeyan through the final sector, but got a bit too close for comfort and drove straight into the back of him. His Mercedes was launched into the air with all four wheels off the ground and flew straight over Karthikeyan's HRT. It smashed both cars in the process, and Rosberg suffered another huge hit when his Merc landed back on the ground and slid into the barrier at high speed.
A spectacular accident and a high-speed impact for the German.
Another one of the crazy crashes from the turbo hybrid era came in 2015 after Daniil Kvyat got it all wrong. The Russian was driving for Red Bull and was on the limit during Q3 in qualifying for the Japanese Grand Prix. While on the run-up to the hairpin, he dropped a wheel onto the grass, but that was all it took to cause one of the biggest crashes of his racing career. The Red Bull veered wildly out of control and hit the barrier at over 140 miles per hour. When it made contact, it spun around violently, dug into the gravel, and flipped over. The wheels and tethers even came off from the downright force of the crash, and the car was absolutely wrecked. Unfortunately for him, he had no one to blame but himself.
Oh, he got on the grass on the way in.
Michael Schumacher had a trip through the gravel as well at the Imola Grand Prix in 1995. The previous year at this track saw the darkest weekend in F1 history, but this year featured a huge crash for F1's biggest driver too. Schumacher lost control of his Benetton and spun out onto the grass, breaking the front wheel off the concrete wall. He hit a gap in the grass and it fired his car into the air, through the gravel and straight into the barriers backwards. The car spun around and smashed the barrier a second time, throwing debris absolutely everywhere. Thankfully though, the safer cars in '95 meant Schumacher was able to walk away from this scary shunt. And that rounds off this list of forgotten F1 crashes. Let us know in the comments which one of these you thought was the worst, and tell us if there's any other crashes that have slipped through the cracks of F1 history. Please smash the like button and subscribe for more motorsports content. This has been Racers Reverie. See you in the next video.